Okay people, so we are back with a new video. I did actually record this video like last week, but I had so much issues with doing it because of Mercury retrograde. It just jacked up my whole week last week. But we are going to be doing a video today talking a little bit about Saturn in the 8th house. So in this video, we are going to be exploring Saturn transits, talking about Saturn return as well. So make sure you guys watch it all the way through, okay? I'm watching you all the way through. Saturn is your rules, regulations, restrictions, responsibilities, and also self-limitations. And we also associate it with fears. The 8th house is the house of death, rebirth, crisis, trauma, transformation, other people's resources, joint finances, inheritance, and taboo subjects. So those of you who haven't seen, I did make a video about Saturn when he was just coming into my 8th house in 2017. It's an old video, and I will touch base briefly on what I said back then. But I've had this transit already, so it's pretty easy for me to kind of go into it. But for you to have it natally, a whole different ball game. So a lot of people that do have Saturn in the 8th house are dealing with some issues surrounding intimacy. Intimacy is not just based on sex, but it's literally based on two people in a room together and having and sharing a moment, talking about, you know, death, their experiences, their traumas, but allowing yourself to be very vulnerable and also be very seen. And usually there is some sort of trauma or there's a restriction surrounding that, making it really hard for them to be close to people. I always say, look at the condition of that person's moon. You know, look at the condition of their 7th house, their 1st house, their 12th house. There's usually other contributing factors that's going to create there being a distance from that person. There could be Saturn opposing that person's moon, Chiron aspecting that person's ascendant. There could be something that contributes to a fear of wanting to be seen. Like, let's go back to our childhoods with this, because usually because what happens with particular placements, a lot of it is contributing to the environment that we were raised in, you know, what things we experienced or went through as children. And for you to have Saturn in this 8th house, to me, I'm kind of seeing that there may have been something very traumatic that would have happened on or around 7 years old, if not 19 years old. Maybe there was a death in your life. Someone could have passed away. There could have been an issue surrounding something being very transformational. Maybe there was some sort of trauma or abuse. I feel like Saturn goes two ways in this house. I've definitely seen it two separate ways. And again, it depends on what's happening with the rest of your chart to contribute to this. But I do find that there's one type of person who may have experienced sexual abuse, right? Who may suppress that by not dealing with it, by sort of suppressing how they really feel about it. And this can create more of a, okay, I'm going to be celibate in my life, or I'm going to be very, very selective about who I'm choosing to be intimate with. So these people become very particular and very thorough, you know, about who they're putting themselves out there to be intimate with. I've seen, like, I remember years ago, there was this woman who came on the Wendy Williams show, and she was like, hey Wendy, I'm a 40-year-old virgin. And everyone was like, oh my God, like everyone was shocked. But I was like, she's got to have some Saturn in her 5th house or Saturn in her 8th house. There's something that's going on there.
How you doing? Hi Wendy, how you doing?
Fine, thanks. Who are you?
Yvette.
Where are you from?
I'm from Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Is there a problem?
No, I am a 50-year-old virgin and I'm proud of it. I grew up in a very strict household. Okay. And I always wanted to wait until I got married, until I had sex.
Right.
And I just haven't met the right one yet.
Okay.
But I get all the time that I'm crazy to wait until I'm married to have sex. I don't get the haters off my back.
Well, all right. Are you dating now?
No.
Are you in love?
Was.
Have you ever fooled around?
I've made out like kissing.
But you've never done anything from the waist below?
Correct.
In your life?
In my life.
What she was saying is she didn't meet anybody that really fit the criteria for her to want to lose her virginity too. And I can understand that, because sometimes, you know, Saturn can create a trauma that had involved an older person that may have been a really uncomfortable introduction into sex, where you may have felt violated enough to completely close yourself off sexually towards other people. So there's that way. The other way is this. I remember a couple of years ago I had someone ask me about, you know, sexual liberation, that there was someone who was very sexual around them, but how did that make sense? Because they had Saturn in their 8th house. Now, this is the thing, this is the house of intimacy, right? And you can very much turn sex into a, I don't want to say a business. We can say business, but we can also say, you can see sex becoming more of a agreement, you know, surrounding just meeting people and not really giving your whole self to them in that moment. I'm not saying you have to give your whole self to them in that moment, but sex is very much supposed to be a spiritual connection, you know, a spiritual exchange. And what happens is Saturn stops that spiritual exchange from happening, because there is some sort of fears that that person is going through in their lives that makes it hard for them to completely unfold or allow people to see what's really going on behind the scenes. And sometimes, right, it can be down to how you were raised. I've got Capricorn in my 8th house. I definitely relate a little bit to this, because it's very easy for me to have sex and not have that emotional bond involved. But I remember, like, growing up, like, in my household, right, watching sex on TV, like, you know, when you watch those old 90s, those old 80s movies, and the woman's on top riding, like, like, she's literally, the woman is literally on top, and it's just so, oh my God, it's just so intimate, it's just so sexy, it's just so like, oh my God, you know, she's just, you know, like shaking, like, excuse me, sorry, but yeah, like, she's just there shaking and just, you know, having a good time. And, you know, it looked very intense, it looked enjoyable, but my mum would be like, turn this off, that's disgusting, you shouldn't be watching sex is disgusting. You know, like, even when it came to like Rihanna, especially Rihanna, because my mum calls her Dutty Rihanna, and she's not Dutty. But mum calls her that because my mum's always seen Rihanna be naked. But again, a lot of this is liberation. My mum never told me about menstrual cycles. She never taught me about sex, never spoke to me about it. She just installed these fears. You're gonna get pregnant if you do this. You're gonna get pregnant if you only care about boys. All things like this, yeah, had a traumatic effect on my development, you know, in terms of my sexuality, because when you have Capricorn here, Saturn in this house, you either take it, you either take your sexuality very, very seriously and become very restricted, or it's a thing where you don't create these emotional connections with people so much. So, like, even in terms of, like, this is the house of psychological transformation, like going through traumas in your life and you having the ability to evolve from them and see where you went wrong, you know, how you can psychologically move forward and develop as a person. And this is a very narcissistic placement. You know, I did make a video talking a little bit about the most hated sign of the zodiac, right? And why, but I explained it in the video as to why it can be that way, or why it can be seen as being that way, because Capricorn rules the 8th house. And narcissism can be based on any sign, like literally any sign can be narcissistic. But I do associate Capricorn with narcissism, especially Gemini as well. But when you have Saturn placed in this 8th house, it does create a difficulty with showing emotions and allowing yourself to evolve through the trauma that you go through. Saturn in this house is very used to hiding away. you know, keeping itself to itself. And sometimes these people could even knock therapy as a whole because there's a fear of what you may find in yourself. This is the house of the mirror, and there's a restriction going on here in terms of you wanting to see your true self. But it can also be a thing where these people want to psychologically evolve in their time, how they want to do it, how they want to go about it. Like, these people want to psychologically evolve, but it's going to take them years to do it. It's not one of those things where it happens overnight, you know, and you are changing, you are evolving, you know, straight after your trauma. It takes them years. And it's just because they want to govern how they are able to psychologically evolve as people. Even in terms of like inheritances, I will never forget, I had a client years and years ago, and he had Saturn in his 8th house as well. Really nice guy. And he was just telling me a little bit about, you know, I asked him about inheritances and what he was waiting for, and he said, oh wow, you know, yeah, I'm waiting for something. You know, my dad has a really big property back home in India. He's got to go there to sign some documents to have the properties released to him, but it's not going to be just a signature and that's it. There's a lot more to the process. And he was just saying, oh, it's just so long for me to do. I'm not sure if I want to do it. Like, I want it, but it's like, it's just so long. First of all, getting the finance to get there, having to have someone look after his kids, or should he bring his kids with him? Where's he going to stay? He can't stay in the property. Like, there's a lot to consider before he can receive his inheritance. And he also, like, I'm not sure if you guys have seen Power, but you know, a character in there called Tariq, his dad died, ghost. His dad died and left him inheritances. But his dad said, for you to receive the inheritances, you have to complete, like, I think it was 4 years of university or whatever it was, before you can get it, and you have to pass. Things like that's what we see when Saturn sits in the 8th house, is you having to wait for your inheritances. You're very entitled to receiving money and property and things coming through, especially if Capricorn was to rule your 4th house, 100%. However, you have to wait for it. There's something that you have to do. There's going to be some sort of restriction in terms of you receiving something that's natural for you. In terms of the Saturn return now, Saturn return happens every 28, 29 or so years, right? And when it's making its way all the way back around towards your natal Saturn in your 8th house, there is a lot more focus now surrounding adulting. Saturn is then, you have to look at your aspects to your Saturn, because my Saturn return was bad, but it wasn't horrendous. And I only have 1 square to my Saturn. So the more squares, the more oppositions you have, and the more difficult planets you have around your Saturn, the more difficult or challenging your Saturn return is likely to be. And also, you know, is it in detriment? Is it comfortable where it is? Like, what's going on with it? You've got to take that into consideration as well. However, if you have a very comfortable Saturn, you've only got trines, sextiles, there's no negative placements, negative aspects, you're more than likely to have an okay Saturn return. But the process of it going into your 8th house, it's about you really taking this house seriously now. This is the house of other people's resources, banks, loans, borrowing money. And there may be something that may come up in this time where you may have to pay someone back. You may even take out a loan, but you may think, you know what, can I afford that loan? You know, should I be paying back a little bit more, a little bit less? What can I do that's going to be beneficial for me? And also, even in terms of like, someone around you may pass away. There can definitely be a death or a very emotional time, which Saturn is saying you need to go through this. You need to experience that intense emotional feeling, and you need to be able to psychologically evolve through here. Saturn's saying take accountability. Therefore, when it's going through this house, how can you take accountability for this transit? Do you have to go through therapy? Are people saying to you, are very nonchalant? How do you not care? And you're like, yeah, I do care. But how do you go about displaying that a little bit better? There should be more thought going into how you are dealing with your psychological issues. And that's what Saturn is saying to you when it's going through your 8th house. And remember, it's going to be a lot more personal to you based on what your chart is looking like. Now, in terms of the transit, honey, oh my God, we've got to talk about the transit. So I went through this transit couple of years ago. It actually first went in, I believe, in 2017. And I made a video where I spoke all about this previously and what I was going through at that specific time back then. And I remember I was seeing this guy, right? And he was fine, Libra rising, Libra moon, oh, he was fine. But I was seeing him, and he was British, right? But he was moving back and forth to America, Texas back, da-da. He was just always back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But we had a really good connection. Yeah, we can say it was sexual connection, but we had a good connection. And I remember before getting with him, I was celibate for a long time. And then after being with him and him going back to Texas, I was like, you know what? I kind of feel like I don't want to be with anybody intimate like that again. I remember he even asked me, you know, come out to Texas with me together. And I was like, I don't feel like I can. Although I would have been with him, right? The fact is, in terms of intimacy, which is what the 8th house is, Saturn is making you look at the reality of it and beyond sex. So I was reflecting on what I had previously seen between us, and to me, it wasn't really worth me going out there because he invited me there. But also it made me reflect on my future relationships and thinking, you know what, I think I need something more meaningful, a lot more deeper. And that's what Saturn is doing when he goes through your 8th house, is he's showing you the reality to everything going on there and what you are supposed to be doing. And it was from that transit, I was like, I think I want to be celibate. And I remember choosing not to have sex for a year. And it's mad because before him, I was celibate for a year. After being in an awful, like horrendous relationship, I chose to be celibate. Then I got with him, broke it, and then it's like, okay, it's time for celibacy again. And even if I don't end up being celibate, at least I know that I know what I'm looking for. Therefore, I'm not going to put myself out there and emotionally build connections with people. I will not forget, yeah, the second that Saturn went into Capricorn in 2017 in December, I will not forget it. I received a letter out of nowhere. And these people were saying to me, honey, you owe us £4,000. Bitch, where? Where? I couldn't believe they come out and said, I owe, where? What? And several years before, I took out a higher purchase. And then I lost my job. I was in a whole predicament. I got evicted. I went through everything, right? But I lost everything at that time. But I was in a position where I could pay my other debts. My other debts were a lot more minor, and I think it was from 2017 I became a lot more consciously aware of my credit. I downloaded different credit apps to see what's on there, what's high, what's low, and I learned a lot more about finance back then, in particular about, you know, borrowing money. I didn't borrow money that year. I didn't take out loans. I was just taking it very seriously. And then fast forward, now that the transit is done, it's over, my credit has boosted. I also received, I think it was it last year? Or maybe the year before, I got a letter from that same company who was saying, you owe us £4,000. I was like, I appealed this because I knew that I didn't. I knew I didn't owe them that much. I was like, I was paying like £300+ a month at the time. And when I calculated it, I paid that shit off. Well, they went through audit. Auditors went in and they discovered that the company were charging people higher interest than they were supposed to. I didn't owe them a damn penny. I didn't owe them anything, and they cleared my debt. My credit went through the roof again. And, you know, finally I'm in more of a position to do more with my credit. But I had so much going on in my life in terms of how I dealt with money. And even in terms of the energy that I was giving to people, like sexual energy, intimate moments, I wasn't being intimate with anybody. So I wasn't really allowing people to really get to know the real me, because when Saturn is going through that house, you are restricting a lot of yourself. and you are very particular about who's going to have this energy and who's not. So this transit is about you taking this house and the themes of this house very, very seriously, looking at things from a very realistic perspective, but adulting in a sense. We've got to take this area very, very seriously. So people, that's my video this week. I hope you guys have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.